He said it like he was ordering a damn side of ranch. We need to trim the non-core, Mitch announced, flipping through my months-long infrastructure proposal like it was a CVS receipt. Then, without looking up, he slid it back across the table with 2 fingers, smirking at the rest of the execs like he'd just neutered a threat to his authority. Consider yourself trimmed, he added. And just like that, 14 years of duct tape miracles, midnight patch jobs, and saving this company from its own stupidity got labeled non-core. I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch. Just tucked the packet back into my folder while my face burned hot enough to weld steel. Nobody said a damn thing. Not HR. Not compliance. Not even Jerry from finance, who still uses my server diagnostic tools to figure out why his Outlook crashes every time he tries to attach a PDF. I sat there, the only woman in the room, the only one who knew our server renewals were 72 hours from lapsing, watching a room full of 6-figure khakis nod along with Mitch like he was Moses descending the mountain with the holy budget spreadsheet. And the real kicker? They didn't even ask what was in that proposal. Didn't ask why I requested a $4,200 firewall license renewal, or the third-party redundancy audit, or the new DNS failover contract that I specifically said was time-sensitive. To them, IT and ops were just that blinking box in the corner that magically kept the lights on. Until it didn't. I walked out of that room with the taste of rust and battery acid in my mouth. No one followed me. Not even Janine. And she usually checks in when my sarcasm dips below cold breeze off a lake and into hurricane forming. I made it to the stairwell before I let my legs give out for just half a second. 14 years. I onboarded this company when the only login anyone had was admin123. I built the internal wiki from scratch in my bathrobe during COVID, taught half the sales team what a VPN was. And now I'm non-core. Hey. If you're listening to this and already feeling that familiar heat in your chest, like maybe you've been written off by someone too blind to see your worth, do me one quick favor. Tap that like button and subscribe. I know 97% of folks hear these stories and just move on, but honestly, it keeps this channel alive, keeps these stories coming. And damn, it helps knowing someone out there gets it. Back at my desk, I didn't slam things. I didn't type furiously or scream into a void like Mitch probably imagined I would. No. I just opened the same tab I'd been keeping pinned for 3 weeks, our DNS provider dashboard. I hovered over the auto-renew checkbox that was currently turned off. Not expired yet, but no thanks to Mitch's belt tightening, it would be soon. See, what no one in that room remembered, what Mitch never knew, was that back in 2012, when the company was just 4 broke dudes and 1 semi-functional coffee maker, I was the one who registered the domain. The LLC wasn't even formal yet. I put it on my personal credit card because the founders were still figuring out the expense structure. Yeah, $14 billed annually. And I never transferred it out of my name. Not because I wanted leverage, but because no one ever asked. I stared at the domain expiry date. 48 hours. If it lapsed, the site would go dark. Emails would bounce. Logins would fail. Client portals? Dead. Zoom links? Gone. Authentication servers? Good luck. All that core infrastructure Mitch was so proud of? Useless without a pointer to connect to it. I took a long sip from my cold coffee, the same mug I'd been using since the merger, the one with the faded "Keep Calm and Reboot" slogan. Then I clicked, remind me later. Not renew. Not cancel. Just later. Let's see how non-core I feel when his Monday morning all hands starts buffering mid-slide, and every investor email returns undeliverable. Turns out, you can trim all you want, but if you cut too deep, you just hit bone.it started with the SSL cert. Friday morning, Jerry from finance stuck his head around my cubicle wall holding his laptop like it was a wounded animal. Hey, I'm getting this not secure warning when I log into the dashboard. That's new, right? He asked, already half laughing, like the internet was just being moody again. I rolled my chair an inch to the left, just enough to see his screen. Yep. Expired certificate. The big red browser-ruining kind. Dated midnight. The system had done exactly what it was told to do when the auto-renew failed. Nothing. The cert was tied to the domain, and the domain was tied to me. I could have fixed it in 30 seconds. Instead, I sipped my microwaved oatmeal coffee sludge and said, "Yeah, probably cached cookies. Try incognito mode." He nodded, completely satisfied with that. I watched him walk away like a toddler carrying a chainsaw. He didn't know what he was holding. None of them did. An hour later, Janine messaged me. "Hey, is it just me or are emails to external clients taking forever to go through?" "Must be a filter issue," I replied. "Have compliance check their outbound rules." I didn't even bother looking at the logs. I already knew what was going on. The domain's MX records were slowly unraveling, just threads of data fraying at the edges. Nothing dramatic yet. Nothing Mitch could screenshot in a deck. Just a heartbeat skipping every so often. By lunch, the sales team was buzzing about how Zoom meetings were randomly booting participants. Mitch walked past my desk twice without saying a word, but his eyes lingered both times. Probably thought I was still licking my wounds from his little gladiator show in the conference room. Truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I was watching. The warning signs were there, plain as day. Authentication requests hanging in purgatory, Slack messages failing to connect, VPN kicking people off like musical chairs. But because it was intermittent, because it wasn't a full-on explosion, no one took it seriously. Not even Mitch. He held a town hall that afternoon, pacing around the break room with a smug little clicker in hand, talking about agility and streamlined operations. The projector glitched 3 times mid-pitch. No one asked why. They just waited it out and clapped like trained seals. I stood in the back, sipping my 4th coffee and leaning against the industrial fridge, listening to him brag about the operational fat we've shed. He even threw a jab. Sometimes it's about subtraction, not addition. Like Marie Kondo says, if it doesn't spark joy. The room laughed. I didn't. Because I knew what was coming. This wasn't about joy. This was about gravity. And I could feel the cables fraying, the system groaning under the pressure of neglect. By 4 p.m., one of the junior devs posted in the general Slack, "Is anyone else's password manager freaking out?" 3 people answered yes. I didn't. Instead, I closed my laptop gently, packed my things, and left exactly on time. First time in months. The sun was just dipping low enough to cast the parking lot in that eerie amber light. I stood by my car a minute longer than usual, watching the automatic lights flicker through the office windows. Mitch was still up there, probably prepping Monday's cost efficiency wins report. He had no idea he'd already lost. Monday morning kicked off with a 9 a.m. leadership sync, or as I now call it, Mitch's hour of delusional grandeur. He strutted into the conference room like he was about to unveil cold fusion, wearing one of those too tight button-ups that made him look like a shrink-wrapped ham with Wi-Fi. "All right, folks," he said, clapping once, like he'd summoned an army. "Before we dig into Q3 objectives, I want to highlight some big wins from our fiscal lean down." I blinked. Lean down. That was the actual phrase. Like we were shedding emotional baggage instead of hemorrhaging functionality. The projector flickered once, then twice, still running on the old firmware I flagged for upgrade 6 months ago. He didn't notice. Or worse, he did and didn't care. First, the IT budget. He looked right at me when he said it. We've realigned our tech spend to focus on actual ROI. No more bloated maintenance contracts or invisible line items that don't tie to customer outcomes. The room murmured approvingly. Sales was all smiles. Marketing nodded like bobbleheads on meth. Even legal gave a polite shrug, probably just relieved they weren't the ones under fire this quarter. I sat still, hands folded, watching the screen behind him glitch as his slides loaded pixel by pixel. He had a graph, of course he did, showing a 37% decrease in infrastructure expenses, complete with cheerful green arrows pointing down like that was a good thing. Never mind that most of that 37% came from axing the exact systems I'd warned him were not optional. He'd even thrown in a quote from some book called Radical Efficiency. I'd bet money he skimmed it on a podcast while shaving. The trick, Mitch said, pacing now, is knowing what's critical and what's legacy fluff. A lot of teams hold on to systems just because that's how it's always been done. But sometimes you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? He was quoting me, word for word. Something I'd said 3 years ago in a disaster recovery planning meeting. I'd set it while rerouting traffic from our dying servers in Chicago through a backup node I built in my laundry room. I glanced across the table. The junior PMs looked glassy-eyed. HR was too busy typing to notice anything. And me? I just bit the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of blood reminded me I was still present, still responsible, still watching the train barrel toward the cliff while the guy in the conductor's hat snapped selfies. Then he dropped the final insult. And we even identified redundant access points to our domain services. Turns out, we don't need multiple renewals stacked in the budget when everything's cloud-based now. That's just waste. I froze. Redundant access points. That was my DNS failover contract. The one I tried to renew. The one that would have prevented exactly what was already happening. Services buckling under the pressure of a single point of failure. He called it waste. No one batted an eye. I caught my own reflection in the conference room's side panel. Tight jaw, steady stare, not a single twitch. I looked like I'd turned to stone. But inside I felt something else. Not rage. Not even vindication. Certainty. I knew the clock had started. I knew, down to the minute, how long before the domain DNS timeout would sever the artery that connected all our cloud-based core services to the outside world. I had built it. I had maintained it. I had warned them. They ignored me, trimmed me, and now they were feasting on their own ignorance, spoon-fed by a man who thought Gartner reports were gospel and domain ownership was just a checkbox. As Mitch moved on to his motivational close slide, the projector blinked once more, then blacked out completely. He chuckled. Looks like someone skipped their maintenance cycle. I didn't even smile, because I knew this wasn't the end of the presentation. It was the beginning of the funeral. By 8:07 a.m. Monday, the building was vibrating, not with productivity, but panic. The first Slack alert hit just as I was unlocking my laptop. #sales support. Client in Atlanta can't log in. Anyone else seeing this? 10 seconds later. #client services. Add Phoenix. Login page is down. Redirect loop? I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled to the browser and typed in the homepage. This site can't be reached. DNS_probe_finished_next domain. There it was. The blood clot had arrived, and now the limbs were going cold. I took another sip of coffee. Bitter, black, and entirely satisfying. By 8:15, the office was a beehive of frantic motion. Phones ringing. People pacing with Bluetooth earbuds like CIA agents. Engineers were already crowding the bullpen, whiteboarding login flows and authentication dependencies like the Titanic hadn't already hit the iceberg. It was cute. Then came the email storm, or rather, the lack of one. Marketing couldn't get their newsletters out. Finance couldn't ping external billing systems. Internal messages were failing to route. Even our sacred HR onboarding portal, the one Mitch personally bragged about to the board, was throwing a 502 bad gateway like a toddler refusing to go to daycare. I sat in my chair, arms crossed, watching as chaos bloomed like mold in a sealed container. By 8:30, Mitch stormed past my desk, phone pressed to his ear, barking half-formed thoughts. No, it's not internal. The systems are clean, the hardware's fine. It's a routing thing, or a hosting issue, or... He glanced at me as he passed, eyes darting like a raccoon caught in a spotlight. I gave him nothing. Not a nod. Not a blink. He doubled back 3 minutes later. Hey, just double-check that nothing weird's going on with. I don't know SSO or certificates or whatever. His tone was that forced casual, trying too hard friendly that people use when they're standing on a cliff's edge. I just swiveled slightly and said, everything looks normal, on my end. Which was true. My screen was normal. My inbox was clean. Because I hadn't touched a thing. And I wasn't about to. Not yet. At 8:47, someone in engineering finally spoke the forbidden words. It's DNS, Mark muttered, staring at his terminal like it had just confessed to murder. The root domain's not resolving. The name servers are dead. The entire table turned toward him like he'd farted in church. What do you mean dead? Mitch asked, sweat blooming at his collar. I mean, Mark said, swallowing. It's not pointing anywhere. There's no active resolution path. The records are gone. Like the domain expired or got nuked. Mitch's voice wavered. We have backups, right? It's not a file issue, Mark snapped, now fully defensive. It's not data. It's the domain. Our digital front door. The thing that tells the entire internet where to find us. That's when I smiled. Not a grin. Not a smirk for show. Just a small, quiet, almost imperceptible curve at the corner of my lips. A private moment of symmetry. Because I'd seen this coming. I built this system. I knew the heartbeat. I warned them. They didn't listen. They never do. Not until the house is on fire and suddenly they remember that the woman they pushed into the basement had the only key to the hydrant. I leaned back in my chair and watched the room unravel. Emails failing, websites dropping, and a director still pretending he had a grip on something that had already slipped through his fingers. And just outside the window, the sky stayed perfectly blue at by 9:11 a.m. The war room had formed. The big glass conference room on the third floor, usually reserved for quarterly board calls and performative team-building sessions, was now packed wall-to-wall with engineers, sysadmins, project leads, and a few senior managers pretending they knew what DNS stood for. Mitch stood at the head of the table like a flailing substitute teacher, trying to control a classroom mid-riot. Okay, people, he barked, tossing a dry erase marker onto the table. Let's keep this productive. We're not here to point fingers. We're here to solve. Classic. The guy who pulled the pin wants to talk about de-escalation while everyone else's eyebrows are on fire. A junior dev, kid named Devin, started explaining how their recent build pushes couldn't connect to the repository server, which was downstream from the authentication handshake, which was tied to the root domain. In other words, the whole damn tree was dead because the roots got snipped. Why is everything tied to the same root domain? Mitch snapped. Didn't we build redundancy into this? We had redundancy, said one of the senior network engineers. The failover path was in that DNS provider contract you canceled last quarter. You said it was unnecessary duplication. Silence. I stood by the coffee station just outside the room, pretending to refill a cup I hadn't touched in an hour. The glass walls gave me a full view, but somehow no one seemed to notice me. We have backups, right? Mitch said again, a little too loud. Let's just restore from backup. That was the moment. The moment you could feel the room pause, not out of confusion, but disbelief. Like he'd just suggested taping a band-aid over a bullet hole in a sinking ship. Backups of what? Said Raj, our infrastructure lead. You don't back up domain resolution. This isn't a database crash. This is the roadmap to the entire system. And right now, the world can't find us because the signpost is gone. Mitch blinked, clearly not understanding, or refusing to admit he didn't. Well then reissue the signpost. Rebuild the damn thing. Raj exhaled through his nose and folded his arms. We can't rebuild what we don't own. That landed hard. Mitch flinched like someone had slapped him with a frozen fish. What the hell does that mean? It means, Raj said slowly, the domain is not registered to the company, which is why legal's getting stonewalled when they try to verify ownership, which is why our DNS records are frozen, which is why the registrar isn't responding to any of our credentials. I watched it hit him, the unspoken part of the sentence, the one no one had said out loud yet but was now crawling across the table like a slow, radioactive fog. Someone else owns it. And it sure as hell wasn't Mitch. He stammered something about consulting legal, then pivoted to blaming IT. I thought you all had processes in place for this, he barked, sweat now forming a visible collar stain. Isn't that what DevOps is for? Resilience? Contingency planning. You slashed our license renewals, someone muttered. You removed the DNS redundancy line item, someone else added. You trimmed the domain escalation contract. You denied the certificate maintenance request. The accusations weren't loud, just sharp enough to sting, like paper cuts. Multiplying. Mitch banged a fist on the table, desperate to reclaim authority. None of this matters. I need answers. Real ones. Who the hell owns the domain right now? There it was. The question. The one I'd been waiting for since Friday. I turned and walked slowly toward the elevator, coffee in hand, pulse steady. Inside that glass cage, you could see it spreading, Little glances, hushed conversations, engineers pulling up registrar databases, old ticket histories, archived emails. And somewhere in that chaos, someone was about to find the name. Mine. Not because I wanted power. Because 14 years ago no one else gave a damn. Because I stayed late, paid for things out of pocket, and filed the paperwork when others were too busy playing beer pong in the break room. Now that old favor had become a live grenade, and Mitch? He just realized he'd been juggling with the pin already pulled. At 9:38 a.m., the room hit critical mass. Devin, the junior dev from earlier, the one Mitch once called buddy for 3 straight weeks because he couldn't be bothered to learn names, was crouched at the far end of the war room with his laptop open, scrolling furiously through WHOS databases and cached records. I saw the moment he found it, the flicker of something between shock and awe on his face. He stood up too fast, bumping the chair behind him. No one noticed. Then in a voice just above a whisper he said, I found it." The room fell quiet, like someone had hit a mute button on a crowded bar. Mitch looked up, still standing near the whiteboard he'd filled with jargon. Remediate, reboot stack, DNS rebridge. None of which meant a goddamn thing in the context of reality. Devin didn't speak again. He just turned the laptop toward the center of the table, slow and deliberate, like he was unveiling a crime scene photo. A glowing WHOS result sat on the screen. Registrant. My name. Email. My email address. Registered. July 14, 2012. Renewal status. Expired. Grace period active. Auto-renew off. Dead silence. Someone exhaled audibly. Someone else muttered, "No way," and leaned in closer, as if reading it again might change the outcome. Mitch blinked. Once. Twice. His jaw didn't drop, it tightened, like his whole body was clenching around the reality that, for once, he wasn't the smartest person in the room, or the loudest, or the one in control. He stared at the screen like it personally betrayed him. Then he slowly turned his head, toward me. I was standing just outside the glass, arms crossed, coffee cup in hand, one eyebrow slightly raised. Didn't need to say a word. I had been in that room all along, just not where he wanted me. Our eyes locked. That was the moment. The moment the tectonic plates shifted and the balance of power didn't just tilt, it inverted. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back at the screen, hoping maybe, it was a glitch. That Devin pulled the wrong domain. That this was all just a coincidence and not a direct, traceable line to his own arrogance. But it wasn't a coincidence. It was 14 years of neglect, stacked like dry kindling. All I did was keep the match dry. Devin looked back and forth between us, clearly aware he had just dropped a nuclear bomb, and wasn't sure if he was about to be fired or knighted. Mitch finally spoke, voice cracking just slightly. Why would it be in her name? Raj answered before I could. Because she's the one who set it up. Back before half of us even worked here. Back when legal didn't exist and you were still at that supply chain startup in Denver. Someone in the room chuckled. Just once. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to rattle him. Mitch turned bright red, then pale, then something in between. The facade was crumbling. The glossy director smile, the confident CEO wannabe tone gone. All that was left was a man in a dress shirt that suddenly seemed 2 sizes too tight. Realizing he had spent the last week mocking the only person who could unscrew this mess. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My name glowed on the screen like a final verdict. Mitch rubbed his temples, muttered something to himself, then stared out the window like he might find divine intervention hiding behind the corporate skyline. Outside the glass wall, I turned slowly and walked back to my desk. Calm. Steady. Inside the room, no one was speaking. Because everyone knew. The most non-core person in the building now held the core of their entire digital existence. And she wasn't in any rush. At by 10:06 a.m., Mitch was in full meltdown. The kind of panic that doesn't look like flailing, at least not at first. No, his version was quieter. More corporate. Phone pressed to his ear with one hand, tie yanked loose with the other, pacing hard enough to leave footprints in the carpet. That performative kind of movement where a man believes if he walks fast enough, he might outrun the consequences. I was 3 desks over. Calm. Logged in, earbuds in, sipping lukewarm coffee like it was a damn beach day. He'd already blown through legal. I knew because Shannon from compliance poked her head out of the hallway just long enough to mouth the words, "He's losing it." The call with legal had gone nowhere, because legal had no jurisdiction over a personal domain registry that predates the company's own formation paperwork. No amount of corporate letterhead changes that. Next came IT security. He stormed into their pod, waving a clipboard like he was summoning demons. There has to be a way around it. Override, backdoor, DNS clone. Hell, just spoof the damn thing. Brady, our security lead, ex-military, stone-faced, allergic to bullshit, just shook his head. We're not spoofing anything. That's fraud. And you approved the migration plan that made her account the root identity for domain access. I didn't approve, I delegated. Mitch snapped, now sweating visibly. No, Brady said, cool as dry ice. You approved it when you signed off on the 2018 consolidation plan. You were listed as VP of Ops then. That paper trail goes straight to you. Mitch's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Fine. What about emergency access protocols? Brady didn't blink. Doesn't apply. She's not an ex-employee. She's still active. Still has elevated credentials. This isn't a breach. It's a bottleneck. And then came the final act, the call to the registrar. He paced while on hold, muttering curses between tight, PR-friendly smiles anytime someone walked by. Devin had slinked back to his desk, probably Googling how to disappear. The war room was quiet now, filled only with the quiet buzz of monitors and the occasional nervous mouse click. Mitch got through. I couldn't hear the other side of the call, but I could hear him. Yes, this is Mitchell Langston, Director of Operations at Rivian Systems. We're experiencing a critical outage and need immediate access to domain controls for rivianseas.com. Yes. No, I'm not the registrant, but I. He paused. His hand went to his forehead. Well, can't you just escalate to someone in enterprise support? This is a business emergency. Another pause. No, I don't have proof of ownership. Look, the person listed is still employed with us. She's right here in the office. His eyes drifted over to me. I didn't look up. Just scrolled lazily through my inbox. Clean. Peaceful. His voice dropped. I could barely make out the rest. She won't talk to me. God, that felt good. Another beat. Then louder. So there's nothing you can do? You're telling me our systems are going to remain down until she agrees to help. I couldn't hear the registrar's response. But the silence that followed was the kind that comes after a door slams shut on a very important part of your dignity. He ended the call with a grunt. Then stood there for a full 10 seconds, just vibrating. Behind him, monitors were flashing red across every team. Lock-in failures. Payment gateway timeouts. Customer chat portals stuck in endless loops. The company's digital pulse was flatlining, and the only person with a defibrillator was currently sipping coffee out of a mug that said, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." Mitch turned, shoulders slumped just enough to crack his perfect posture. He looked at me like a man approaching a cliff's edge with no parachute, no plan, and no idea how long the fall would last. I smiled. Not wide. Not smug. Just enough. Because for once, I didn't have to lift a finger to prove my value. He was doing it for me. One desperate, useless phone call at a time. By 11:02 a.m., he finally did it. Mitch cornered me. Not metaphorically, literally. I was in the kitchenette, waiting for the microwave to finish reheating the sad excuse for a breakfast burrito I'd abandoned 2 hours earlier, when the DNS hellfire broke loose. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Fast. Heavy. Determined in that flailing, desperate way men walk when their pride is bleeding out, but they still want to pretend it's just a paper cut. He planted himself in front of the microwave, cutting off my path. Arms crossed like he thought posture could still win him something. His tie was undone. His voice dropped low. "All right," he said, teeth clenched, like this was a hostage negotiation instead of a reckoning. "You've made your point." I raised an eyebrow, reached around him, and hit the microwave cancel button. It beeped once, then fell silent. Unlike him. "You're gonna fix this," he said more softly now. "You have to." I leaned against the counter, peeled back the burrito wrapper, took a bite, chewed. Slowly. Then finally. Do I? He blinked. I mean, of course. You're part of this team. That's funny, I said, mouth half full. I could have sworn you trimmed me. The words hit like a slap. He flinched. Actually flinched. I think it was the way I said it. Calm. Even. Measured. Like it wasn't personal, which made it so much worse. Mitch glanced around, like he was afraid someone might be listening. Of course, half the office had their ears up like meerkats. Look, he said, lowering his voice again. I'll authorize whatever you need. Anything. Name your price. I'll make sure finance clears it. Hell, I'll have legal draw up a contractor agreement if that's what it takes. I wiped my fingers with a napkin. I thought we were all about cutting costs. He chuckled nervously. Small. You're making your point. We get it. But now's the time to be a team player again. Let's fix this. There it was. The shift. The moment he realized he wasn't asking, he was begging. Trying to code it in professionalism, sure, but the edges were frayed. His pride was leaking from the corners of his mouth. You called my work legacy fluff, I said, tilting my head. Told the whole leadership team that infrastructure was a graveyard for unnecessary spending. That sound about right. His face flushed. Okay, maybe I went too far. But I didn't mean you specifically. No, I nodded, taking another bite. You meant the systems I built. The ones you're now standing in the ruins of, wondering where the fire extinguisher went. He took a step closer, lowering his voice further. What do you want? Ha! A title? A raise? Public apology? Just tell me what it'll take. I stared at him. Dead silent. No answer. Just silence so loud it started to choke the air between us. I let it sit there. Let him squirm in it. Because he wanted to rush through it. He needed resolution. But I wasn't in a hurry. I'd waited years for someone like Mitch to realize how much damage a single overlooked name on a domain registration could cause. And here he was, backed into a kitchenette with nothing but half-truths, corporate lingo, and a dying website to shield him. I finally exhaled through my nose. It's not about what I want, Mitch. It's about what you lost. You had a team that kept your whole operation afloat. Quietly. Efficiently. Without headlines or slide decks. And you threw us under the budget bus because you thought shouting cost savings made you smart. He opened his mouth to object, but I raised a finger. And now? Now you want me to come fix it because the company's bleeding money, clients are walking, and legal's about 2 hours from filing a breach of SLA report to every one of our enterprise accounts. I dropped the burrito in the trash. Wiped my hands. I'll think about it. That broke him. The hell do you mean you'll think about it? I stepped around him slowly, voice cool as glass. I mean, I have a lunch break. And you've got some thinking to do. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The weight of his silence behind me was louder than any apology he could muster. And I hadn't even lifted a finger. The emergency exec call was scheduled for noon sharp. No agenda. No pre-reads. No caterlanche. Just desperation. Served raw, with a side of panic. I walked in 10 minutes late. On purpose. Let the tension marinate. The conference room was already full. CFO, CTO, legal, head of sales, even the CEO herself dialing in remotely from some sterile hotel suite with a bad lighting filter and worse Wi-Fi. Mitch stood at the far end of the room like a corpse in a suit. Pale. Sweating. Eyes darting anywhere but toward me. I took the only empty seat left, right across from him. Sat down slow. Let my chair creak a little louder than necessary. Set my coffee on the table like a gavel. No one said a word. The CEO's face filled the monitor, her voice clipped and tight. Mitch, walk us through what's happening. The short version. He cleared his throat. Twice. Took a sip of water that shook in the glass like he was auditioning for a Parkinson's PSA. We're experiencing a critical DNS outage, he began, hands clasped in front of him like a middle schooler explaining how the science lab caught fire. We've lost access to core services, authentication, public site email routing. It's a full resolution failure. And why? The CEO asked flatly. Has it not been resolved? Mitch hesitated. 1 beat. 2. It appears, he said slowly, that the domain isn't registered to the company. The room didn't react at first. Not visibly. Just a collective tightening of jaws, knuckles, and stomachs. Clarify that, the CFO said, voice icy. What does that mean? Mitch swallowed. It's registered under an individual's name. A legacy oversight. From early formation years. And whose name would that be? The CEO asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone turned to look at me. I didn't shift. Didn't blink. Just sat there, calm as a lake in January. Finally, Mitch exhaled. It's hers. More silence. The CEO rubbed her temple. Is she refusing to cooperate? No, I said, sipping my coffee. I haven't been asked properly. Legal cleared her throat. Without access to the domain, we're in breach of 4 client SLAs. Every second this continues, we're looking at financial penalties and potential lawsuits. I understand, Mitch said quickly, like saying it faster would make it smaller. The CEO's face hardened. Then fix it. He turned to me. That's when it happened. The real moment. The climax. The handoff of power. He leaned forward, and in a voice that tried to sound firm but landed somewhere between plea and prayer, he said, "Will you transfer it back to us? Now." I leaned back in the chair. Took my time. Glanced around the room. At all the people who had nodded along as Mitch gutted the infrastructure budget. Who chuckled at non-core jokes while we kept their systems breathing through sheer will and unpaid weekends. Then I looked him in the eye. You trimmed me, I said quietly, voice calm but sharp enough to draw blood. Turns out, you trimmed your company's lifeline too. He opened his mouth, but only one sound came out. A whisper. A breathless, broken thing that barely made it past his lips. Oh no. Exactly.